America, a land first inhabited by Native Americans. America held promising grounds for future settlements, societies, and governments. Even more, the immense land gave way for historical events that we know today. The Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, and much more that history can provide. However, the greatest historical achievement derived from the land was the creation of something big, a constitutional society. The United States, a nation founded on pride and democracy, based on liberty and freedom. What started as 13 colonies became an absolute superpower, with education, economy, and military. But a look of how the original 13 colonies started must be viewed all the way back to 1492. Italian explorer Christopher Columbus. His objective, to sail west until his ships reached Asia, where the riches of gold, pearls, and spice awaits. Columbus starts his voyage on August 3, 1492, colonizing and spreading Spanish influence across the lands. An expedition funded by Spain in hopes of finding a shorter trade route to Asia. What they don't know is that it will be the discovery of a lifetime. One that would garner the birth of a future nation, a nation of liberty, freedom, and justice for all. 1721. The British Parliament seeks to eliminate foreign competition by passing an act that requires colonists to import tea only from Great Britain. Parliament needs money, and fast. The Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, but most importantly, the Tea Act, are imposed to tax the colonists. However, the colonists have no plans to go along with them. December 16, 1773, Griffin's Wharf in Boston, Massachusetts, saw a revolutionary protest. The protest was the first major act of defiance to British rule over the colonists. Americans wouldn't take taxation without representation, without a fight. The colonists dumped 343 chests, weighing over 92,000 pounds, in the Boston Harbor. This event would later be remembered by the name, the Boston Tea Party. Soon, American patriots across the 13 colonies would fight tirelessly for independence, specifically a declaration. July 4th, 1776. Delegates to the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia and approved the Declaration of Independence. To outsiders, it was just an ordinary document. For the first colonists, it was the point of no return. The principal author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, sought liberty and helped announce the separation of 13 North American British colonies from Great Britain. Though this was no simple decision, the Americans were prepared for the outcome. Their independence gave way to a path that would change the course of their future. That path was the future expansion of a new nation, the United States. The creation of the new country allowed the eager colonists to establish self-governance and prove that democracy prevails despite innumerous impediments. The benefits a newly formed country makes, a simple mineral can do as well. First found in Sutter's Mill, 1849, gold held the luster to attract more than 300,000 Americans to the California gold fields. News of the discovery was spread, and settlers from the vast East held no hesitation in obtaining gold. Despite common misfortunes and bankruptcy from the gold business, the gold rush ultimately promoted westward expansion. Prospectors sailed around the dangerous Cape Horn or risked diseases hiking across the Isthmus of Panama. Or more commonly, dare-taking travelers traveled 2,000 miles through overland route with cholera behind their tails. Despite the negative impact, miner population in California grew from 4,000 in 1848 to 250,000 by 1853. Few struck it rich, but the population growth became richer. 1861. Lincoln wins the presidential election and becomes the 16th president. In the same year, however, 10 southern states secede from the Union. Uproar is spread amongst the Unionists. April 12, 1861, the Civil War was triggered. The Confederate Army opened fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Bay and claimed it as their own. Lincoln called out a responding militia, and 4 more slave states seceded. The tensions began to stack up, and more battles occurred in Tennessee, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Mississippi, and Georgia. 1861, in an ultimate offense, General William Sherman led his army into Georgia and South Carolina, destroying their economic infrastructure, while General George Thomas destroyed Tennessee's Confederate Army at the Battle of Nashville. By the spring of 1865, all the principal Confederate armies surrendered. Resistance collapsed, and the war had ended. The 4-year battle brought awareness for a better unity amongst the states and corrections in their constitutional government. Hence, the long, painful process of rebuilding a nation began. The Transcontinental Railroad was built upon the idea of manifest destiny and westward expansion, and was considered one of the greatest American inventions of the 19th century. While the nation was still divided from the Civil War, the railroad connected the East and West, which resulted in a surplus of goods transported to and from both coasts. The construction of the railroad was authorized by the Pacific Railroad Acts of 1862 and 1864. By the 1890s, the United States was becoming an urban nation, and the railroad supplied cities and towns with food, fuel, building materials, and access to markets. Cities were built around the railroad, creating new economic and political opportunities. The Transcontinental Transportation Network revolutionized the American economy because the transport of goods was made much faster and cheaper, making the U.S. a superpower. During World War II, countries feared Nazi Germany for their conduction and nuclear weapons research. In 1940, however, the U.S. government began funding its own atomic weapons development program, the Manhattan Project. Over the next several years, the program's scientists worked on producing the key materials for the nuclear fission uranium and plutonium bomb. July 16, 1945. The Manhattan Project held its first test of an atomic device, a plutonium bomb. By the time of the test, the Allied powers had already defeated Germany. Japan, however, still lingered. They gave the Japanese the option to surrender or meet utter destruction. Despite their disadvantages, the Japanese refused to quit. August 4th and 7th, the U.S. dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki respectively. This action brought the war with Japan quickly to an end and demonstrated new weapons of mass destruction to the Soviet Union. The 2 bombings ultimately gave way for countries to utilize nuclear weapons for political purposes in decades to come. (1954) North Vietnam seeks to unify the entire country under a single communist regime, modeled after those of the Soviet Union and China. The South Vietnamese government, on the other hand, fought to preserve a Vietnam more closely aligned with the West. By 1969, more than 500,000 U.S. military personnel were sent and stationed in Vietnam, a strategy against the Viet Cong. Despite the U.S. soldiers and their power, the Viet Cong proved to be a menace. They knew the surrounding environment more than the Americans, and very often they were difficult to locate, either through hiding or disguising as civilians. Surprise attacks were common too. The Soviet Union and China poured weapons, supplies, and advisors to the north, in midst of the fighting, a factor that made the US eventually back out of the war. The costs and casualties of the growing war proved too much for the United States to bear. By 1973, all US combat units were withdrawn and South Vietnam fell to a full-scale invasion by the North in 1975. The United States military was demoralized and its civilian electorate deeply divided. As the information superhighway comes of age, America wakes up to a new and terrifying friend. It is the blackest day in American history. On the morning of September 11, 2001, two passenger planes hijacked by terrorists linked to Al-Qaeda crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York. 34 minutes later, a third plane, American Airlines Flight 77, hits the Pentagon. At 10:03, a fourth plane, believed to have been heading for the Capitol or the White House, crashes near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after passengers on board take on the hijackers. Nobody expects the World Trade Center's South Tower to collapse. At 10:28, the World Trade Center's North Tower also falls. The 9/11 attacks claim almost 3,000 lives in New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. It was an attack that no one saw coming. It was devastating. It was seen almost as a declaration of war by Al-Qaeda and transnational extremists on the American homeland. But the worst attack on American soil serves to galvanize the nation. America is able to do something so quickly, so expeditiously in terms of getting back to order after the travesty of the World Trade Center towers when they came down. America rebuilds and looks to the future. A common spirit is embedded in the heart of all Americans. It was this same spirit that allowed our ancestors to push past barriers and fight for what was right. Issues of race, ethnicity, and gender have been overcome by Americans in search of equality and freedom. Despite our differences, we are all united as one people. We are American.